letting go of your ego doesn't work. And the reason being is that you will always have an ego, regardless of how many times you try and let go of it. You see, ego isn't bad. Ego being in control is bad. You being in control of your ego is completely fine. But this is where we have a problem, because most people who have their egos inflated don't know that their egos are inflated. And I'm most likely talking about you, because I was there too. Ego inflation goes both ways. Obviously, you have the narcissistic people who think that their needs are above everyone else's. But what a lot of people don't know, and what is actually way more common, are the egos that think way too lowly of themselves. In this video, I'm going to show you how to become more aware of when your ego activates, what to do when your ego does activate to build a healthier one, and how to take control of your ego to benefit you. And I'll expand on that later. But first, you might be thinking, why do we even have an ego in the first place, even though it's so bad to have a big one? The ego is one of the 3 pillars of the mind. So you have your emotions, your intellect, and then you have your ego, which is your sense of self. It's your self-image. It's your identity. And like I said before, ego isn't bad, just like your emotions aren't bad. They just are, even the negative ones. What makes your emotions bad is when they take control over you and you do something impulsive, just like your ego. But people don't say to ignore your emotions, to become emotionless. They say to become aware of your emotions, to notice them when they arise, and when they do, you don't judge it. So this way you can differentiate yourself from your own emotions. The same thing goes for your ego. You see, a healthy ego is one that is not stuck in one identity. It's willing to change and bend. So how do you become more aware of your ego? Well, let me give you a scenario. You're at the gym, you're 5'11", 170, you're skinny fat, and naturally at the gym you see somebody else, 6'4", 200 pound, lean, all muscle. Naturally, you start to compare yourself to him. You see that he's much bigger than you, and that makes you feel bad. And to compensate for this negative feeling, you try to bring him down to make yourself feel better. You say that, maybe you're better looking than him. Maybe he really just can't guard you in basketball, etc. Ego runs off of comparison. You can't compare yourself to other people unless you have an identity. You can't be taller or shorter than somebody else unless you have a height. It's the voice that tries to bring other people down to make yourself feel better. Now, let me give you a completely different example, and this might hit closer to home for a lot of your people. See, let's say there's a girl, you know what I'm saying? She looking right, you know what I'm saying? She looking right. But instead of actually trying to talk to her, why even bother? She's gonna reject me anyway. And this too is an example of ego. Why? Because instead of trying to compensate for the pain, you try and avoid the pain completely by not putting yourself in the situation to even feel the pain. We think so lowly of ourselves that we don't even think we have a chance, even though in reality, we probably do. Because when you have a low self-worth, it's easy to think that we don't deserve something. And so when we think that we don't deserve something, it doesn't feel bad when we don't get it. If we think we don't deserve love, it doesn't hurt for us to not get love, because technically we're not losing anything. So it's more painful to try than to completely give up. These are the 2 things that you have to become aware of to notice your ego. Okay, so now what? Now you know how to become more aware. How does that make my ego healthier? Well, the good thing is you already completed the first step of having a healthier ego. Being aware of when your ego activates is the first step. It's actually the most important step of building a healthier ego, because once you notice your ego, you start to understand how the comparison that was in your mind was totally unfair. See, let's go back to the gym scenario. Your ego didn't know that the 6'4", 200-pound man used to be fatter than you at one point. That it took him 5 years to build the physique that he has today. And now you're comparing yourself to him even though you've only been in the gym for 5 days. Another example, classroom setting. Teacher asks this question, a question is on the board. You think you got the right answer, but then you notice you don't want to raise your hand because you're afraid of looking stupid. This degree of noticing will build a healthier ego because every single time you notice these things, your ego slightly weakens bit by bit. But noticing when the ego activates won't be enough. Yeah, sure, yeah, it will help massively. But just because you're aware of your fears doesn't mean your fears go away. Now let's go back to the classroom. Just because you notice you're afraid to speak up doesn't mean that your fear has gone. Not until you learn how to tolerate this fear, this emotion, this negative emotion. But here's the thing, okay? Watch. Being aware of your ego helps you tolerate this emotion significantly, like massively. And tolerating your negative emotions will significantly lower your ego. Okay, so now that we know how to notice our ego and how to make it as small as possible, how can we use our ego to benefit us? And this might be contradictory to the whole video, but let me cook, all right? Let's look at sports. Michael Jordan, he was known to have a massive ego. I'm talking about he took everything personally. One small jab to his greatness and he's challenging you to a 1v1 on the spot.
Where you shooting at? We go play 1v1 me and you right now. Damn.
He's 50 years old, doesn't matter. I don't know how old is he. He's probably like 50, I don't know. And it was his ego that made him so great. It gave him drive. It was his push to be the greatest of all time. But now, Michael Jordan is an extreme case. Sure, he was the greatest of all time, but that big of an ego is insanely unhealthy. And I'll get to this point later. But meanwhile, I'm gonna give you another example. My first instrument was a bass guitar before I even touched an electric guitar. And back in high school, I was the only bass player because I went to a very small school. Until one day, I wasn't the only bass player at my school anymore. There's a new kid on the block, and this new guy was levels above me. I'm talking about he was insane. He still is insane. And naturally, a bass player to another bass player, you know what I'm saying? I was like comparing myself, and it stung. It hurt. I want to say a lot, but I definitely felt some pain in my chest. I'm not gonna hold you. But this comparison, it gave me the drive to practice even harder, to practice more. I chose to see this as a positive to fuel me to get better. And to my surprise, this period was the period where I made the fastest growth I've ever made in such a short amount of time. Now, did I eventually get better than him? No, not even close. But my point here is that ego can give you the drive to push even harder and accomplish more in a competitive setting. But be careful, because this can easily become a double-edged sword. If you're not aware of it, if you can't tolerate it, it's gonna stab you. And this is where you see people's lives crumble when they identify with some label, and then with a snap of Thanos' fingers, that label is gone, or that they've been proven that who they thought they were was wrong. And you see this in athletes all the time when they get like a career-ending injury and now they can't play the sport that they identified with so much, and then they just fall apart. See, the key here is that you need to have an ego that closely resembles who you actually are in reality. One that can help you grow and get better and reach greater things, but at the same time, when it's time to change, you can tolerate it. You can tolerate the change. You're not hard stuck in just one direction. The secret is you have to find the balance between the two. Now, if you want to know how your ego and your self-image shapes what you do on a day-to-day basis, and how to change what you do to better help you do what you actually want to do, I highly recommend you clicking on the video that pops up on the screen. It's really nice. All right, just trust me on that one, okay?